the 9th of December, the Indian Army and PLA troops had a major skirmish in Yangtse along the LAC in Arunachal Pradesh. Now, Yangtse has been historically been a volatile flashpoint between the two countries. Raksha Mantri Shri Rajnath Singh, in his statement in the parliament, said that PLA's effort to unilaterally change the status quo at the LAC has been met resolutely by the Indian Army and the PLA troops forced to retreat. China has never accepted the McMahon Line and refers to Arunachal Pradesh as Xinjiang, that is the southern part of China's Xinjiang, with the Chinese passion for renaming everything, just about everything. Xinjiang is the Chinese name for Tibet. Therefore, according to the Chinese, Arunachal Pradesh is southern Tibet. But why is Arunachal Pradesh in general and Tawang in particular so important for China? To discuss the skirmishes, the border issues between India and China, and much more, we have with us Claude Arpi, author of the quadrilogy on Indo-Tibet relations 1947 to 1962, and a keen China watcher. Welcome to Kashi Manthan Samvad. Claude, it's an honor to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. In 1951, Claude, Jawahar Lal Nehru said that McMahon Line is our border, map or no map. China has never accepted this line after the initial days when they were very hesitant about just about everything. Now we have this feeling that the border issue stems from this historical differences over McMahon Line in the eastern sector. So what, in your opinion, is the origin of the border dispute between India? I would like you to throw some light on the matter. So what is the origin in the eastern sector in particular?
I mean, the main sin, the main origin has been the invasion of Tibet in 1950-51. But Nehru said that line is our border, map or not map. Fortunately, there's a map for that sector, which is not the case for the central sector, Barawati, or for Ladakh. It's only a sector which has a map. Of course, that map has some defect. What happened in 1913, for 6 months, the plenipotentiaries of Tibet, India, it was Sir Henry McMahon, the Foreign Secretary of India, and China, even Chen, discussed. Mainly, they were wanted to discuss and settle the border between Tibet and China, where there had been dispute for decades and even centuries. During this talk, during these 6 months, it started in December of 1913. In March, the Tibetan plenipotentiary, who was the Prime Minister of Tibet, was representing the 13th Dalai Lama, Lochen Chatra, and Sir Henry McMahon sat with Charles Bells, the assistant of McMahon. And they decided for a common border between India, British India at that time, and Tibet. China was not involved because China was not nowhere to be seen in the area. China's only concern was the border between Tibet and China, not between India and India and Tibet. But once they invaded Tibet in 1950-51, suddenly they start calling it illegal. They said, we have not been consulted. But during these 6 months, Ivan Chen, the Chinese plenipotentiary, never asked to be represented because it was purely an issue between British India and Tibet. So thereafter, they start calling it illegal and we don't recognize. But interestingly, in Bandung in 1955, when Zhou Enlai met Nehru, they discussed, there was a quite long discussion about McMahon Line. He said, we have no issue on the principle on this line. We don't like the British connotation, the name McMahon. But if you drop the name of McMahon, we have no problem. At that time, Zhou Enlai said, we have to consult my Tibetan colleagues. I mean, that was just words, because from the time they invaded Tibet till 1962, the war, and later on, they have never consulted the Tibetan. Even today, there's never been a party secretary of Tibetan origin in Tibet. So, but Chuan Lai said, I will consult my Tibetan colleagues and come back to you. Of course, it never came back to you. So now this McMahon Line is based on an agreement between India and Tibet. So issue is that after 1954, after the Panchshir Agreement, India stopped recognizing Tibet as a separate nation. Therefore, China says that Tibet had no business to sign, had no power to sign, which was not true, because in 1951, 52, Tibet was an independent nation with all the characteristics of an independent nation, and they were entitled to sign an agreement, and they signed it, and China didn't oppose it at that time. They were present. Ivan Chen was during these talks. Now we have a line on that eastern side. Mm-hmm. First, it's different from the other sectors of the border, because in the case of the central sector, mainly Baramati, and there's 6 places which are disputed. China in 2000 gave their maps. There was an exchange of maps between government of India and government of China. In the western sector in Ladakh, one day in 2002, China brought their map for 20 minutes and withdrew. They objected of Gilgit-Baltistan being put in India's border. But in the case of the eastern sector of Tawang, maps were never shown. So today, same thing than in the 1950s, we don't know what are the claim of China for the LAC, I'm speaking, because for the international border, they claim till the foothills. They have englobed, as you mentioned, the entire Arunachal, the NEFA at that time, and their international border is considered the foothills, and they all call it Southern Tibet. Now, the second issue is that that McMahon line, it's a line, it's better than nothing, but that line was not precise. 2 very bold British officers, Captain Bailey and Captain Morshid of the Survey of India. Captain Bailey was from the intelligence. They traveled for 6 months on behalf of Henry McMahon to draw the line, to prepare a map. But at that time, 1913, 1914, the means of surveying were not what they are today. And therefore, there's several deficiencies in that. Now, the main issue is that these deficiencies have become big dispute. And in 1960, I will give you a map. China published a map of the so-called Indian intrusion in Indian troops crossing the McMahon Line, or the so-called McMahon Line. And these 3 first places are still there today. One is Kenzimane Samdorongchu, which Kenzimane saw the first attacks in October 1962, and Samdorongchu in 1986. There was also a very serious clash with China. Second is Yangtse, where on December 9, several hundred Chinese troops intruded into India's territory, and there was a clash. Thankfully, it was solved in a few hours. And on 11, as mentioned by RM, everyone withdrew, and there was a BPM, a border personnel meeting at Bumla, and it was sorted out for the time being. And the third one was Longju, that also has come in the news recently. The Chinese have built a village in that place. No, first Longju was the site of the first serious clash with casualty in August of 1959. And consequently, India withdrew little bit south in Maja, and today China has built a village in that place, Longzhou, which is a couple of kilometers south of what India perceives is IB, its international border. So these three places have been the focus of really serious dispute. There are a few others in Arunachal, like Azafila, like the fishtails, or one Dipula near Kibutu, but the three first are still there. And it was expected that if China would do something, they would do it in one of these places, especially in Yangtse. Now, the issue in Yangtse, as well as 2-3 other places, is that the ridge is not fully clear. So you see the IB, the international border, the McMahon Line is based on the watershed principle. So there's no issue in Sikkim, for example, where the watershed is very clear, or even in central sector. Though China is claiming few places here and there south of the watershed, but the watershed is clear, you can refer to the watershed. But unfortunately, when the two continents clashes millions of years ago, they have not done a perfect line for the cartographer to define a border. So there is obviously sometimes it's not easy to find where is the watershed. That is the issue in Tagla Ridge and Namkachu in 62. That is a big issue in Yangtse also. So China has benefited from that, that is not clear, to try to push their line south. And that's also one of the reasons today, because they don't accept India's position in Yangtse. That's why they have been coming time and again, but this time they have come in larger number. So that's the background of the thing. In my opinion, this will continue, but it will continue to these places which are really disputed. So that's the background of the McMahon Line and what China called the so-called McMahon Line.
So basically, they are trying to take advantage of the disadvantages of topography and indulging in cartographic aggression. That has been their trait. But in 1962, Claude, the Chinese army had captured most of NEFA, as Arunachal Pradesh was known then. But after the war, they withdrew 20 kilometers behind the McMahon Line. So if they think that their claim is so viable, then what was the reason for their withdrawal in 1962?
I think, frankly, I think they are not sure of that it is a border. When you look through the records, and some Chinese record, not many, but you discover that China has realized the value of the McMahon Line very late, not before 1957, 1958. And that explains that not till 1959, Chinese troop was posted north of the line. Now, the big turning point was the flight of the Dalai Lama in March of 1959. And once the Dalai Lama left Tibet and was given asylum by Nehru and his government in India, many things changed. And they start becoming aggressive. First in Longzhou in August of 59, and also in Ladakh. So it was on all the fronts they start becoming more aggressive. And they realized that this NEFA could be a bargaining chip for get the accession accepted by India. What has happened that in 1954-55, China started that road crossing across the Indian territory. At that time, early 1954, India was still publishing maps showing undefined boundary. So China has used this to say, you don't know where is your border. And India, the road was inaugurated in July 1957, and India started writing complaint about it in 1958, and it came in the parliament in 1959. Now, China says that if you don't complain for so many years, why it means that you're not sure that it's yours. But they were very keen of solving the accession issue. When Zhou Enlai came in 1960, in April 1960, and it led eventually 6 months talks between the official of China and India. That was the most extensive talks. At that time, he was ready for a swap or bargain. You acknowledge that we occupy the accession, it's our road. They needed it for connecting their two new provinces, Xinjiang and Tibet. So there was no question. Actually, he met RM V.K. Krishna Menon, and Menon has taken very, very poor note. I have the impression that he typed it himself, but these notes are available in the Nehru Memorial Library. And he said that, forget about accession, it's ours. There's no discussion about it. But we are open for discussion for other sectors. It meant that they were ready in 1960. So the main bargain to claim so forcefully the NEFA and later today the Arunachal is for one day probably to get bargaining chip for the accession that they will say they will never give away. So that's
basically
I want to
a bargaining chip.
Sorry.
Basically to be used as a bargaining chips, perhaps.
Yes, it's a bargaining chip, and I think it's not easy to really demarcate the border, and China and India has never sat together, even before 62. In 1960, they sat for 6 months, and we have the reports of the official, which is very detailed, but it was too much in favor of India. The fact is that once Tibet had been invaded, it was a new neighbor, and the new neighbor didn't behave like the previous one. There was never a problem, including the Loseling monastery in Lhasa collecting taxes in the Tawang monastery south of the McMahon Line, because it was between two friends and everything could be worked out and discussed. But when China became the new owners of Tibet, everything changed. And we have a tendency to try to put, for political reason, under the carpet the fact that Tibet has been an independent nation. But if you put it too much under the carpet, you can't explain and you can't justify your position today on the McMahon Line.
And it's not only the cartographic aggression, Claude. I mean, in 2021, China renamed 15 places in Arunachal Pradesh. I'm sure 15. So, and they call it standardization. I'm not sure what it means. And in 2017, they had renamed 6 places in Arunachal Pradesh. So what, in your opinion, is this idea behind these assertive actions of renaming places in Arunachal Pradesh, which is an integral part of India?
They have always, as you mentioned in the introduction, they have always renamed places. You know, in 1954, just after signing the Panchil Agreement, everyone was so elated in India that Nehru said in the parliament, it's the best thing I've done in my life to sign that agreement. I've always called it a sin. But that was in April of 1954. In June of 1954, the first intrusion came in central sector in Barawati, and China called it withdrew. Now nobody knows where this withdrew comes from. Similarly, in Ladakh today, so many names. So when you want to draw a map or do anything, you have to face this issue of the change name. So they have done it officially for 15 name more recently, but it doesn't change. Actually, they have taken mostly the Tibetan names and they have transliterated in Pinyin with their own pronunciation. Like very often they can't pronounce the Tibetan name. You have that very famous area called Metok, which is north of Upper Siang, which is in the great band of the Brahmaputra, where they want to do some hydropower, mega or giga hydropower plant. And they can't pronounce Metok. Metok means flower in Tibetan. So they call Mutao. And when they transcribe in Pinyin, it means Mutao. So everyone start the media, first their media, and after our media start calling it Mutao, Mutao. And that is Metok. So sometimes they rectify, they put Medog because they can't say T. You know, it's because of a question of tongue. They can't say certain names, so they will change it. Similarly, these 15 names, mostly it is places which were existing before 1914 and which had some of these areas Tibetan names, actually, like in Kinnaur or like in Spiti or like in Ladakh. It doesn't mean that Ladakh Spiti is Tibetan, therefore Chinese, because they have a Tibetanized name. So they have changed this name, but why should India bother by this change of name? Actually, India should really do an effort to use the original Tibetan names, like Metok and all this. And I've been telling all my friends who are working on maps, please use these old Tibetan names, because they correspond to something which is historically correct, not something which has been sinicized.
In that case, we are accepting what the Chinese are saying, in a sense.
Yes, that is a way to put their point. And when they start call it Bharati Vujhe, official in India, they start scratching their head for a few months. They said, what is this Vujhe? So it creates confusion. Very often it creates confusion. Even the name of the Tagla Ridge or the Namkachu or Dola Post or Atungla in the north of Tawang have all been changed. And it's very difficult sometimes to tally. People who have been writing books about this issue and using Chinese source, they are confused very often, and so it brings confusion. So that's part of the game that we.
So maybe that is part of some part of Sun Tzu's art of war, keeping the enemy always confused. Now shifting to
now they call Xiaokang the Tibet. So now it's become official. Everyone has to call Xiaokang Tibet. It's a Chinese name. Why should it call it?
Definitely. So shifting to a more central issue, Claude, why is Tawang so important for China? I mean, why does China want Tawang?
I think one of the reasons is the bargain, and also if they would get Tawang, they will never get it. But it would nullify the Shimla agreement on the border, because it is south. If India would agree one day, that's why they put pressure. They can try, they try their luck, but they will not get. But if one day India would agree to give Tawang, they would say the entire line does not exist. So that's one thing. Also, the monastery is important for them because it's a large monastery. I think it's the largest monastery in Tibet Buddhism in India, 600 monks, and it has been affiliated to Drepung Losoling, like I mentioned earlier. But many of the monasteries, like in Ladakh or elsewhere, have been affiliated to Tibetan monastery. And vice versa. For example, many of the places in Western Tibet were affiliated to Bhutanese monastery and Bhutanese Lama. That's why Bhutan had 8 enclaves in Western Tibet. So this cultural exchange, it's not, I'm living in Pondicherry, it's not because we have a church which is affiliated to the Vatican, it might send some money to the Vatican, that the entire Pondicherry belongs to the Vatican or Italy. That is just Chinese reasoning like that, but it's not a legal fight, no? So that bargaining, that disconnecting with the McMahon Line is one of the reason. And another reason, of course, is the fact that the sixth Dalai Lama, Tsangyang Gyatso, is born in Ugyeling, south of Tawang. So they would like to, whoever the entire, for example, one Dalai Lama is born in Mongolia, so Mongolia belongs to them. So that way, I really pray that the next Dalai Lama will be from India, whether it's from Arunachal or Ladakh or anywhere, that it cannot be a legal proof that it is their territory, because the Pope is, one Pope was born in Poland. You can't say that the entire Polish state belongs to the Vatican. So that is their type of argument, which should be countered very, very strongly and tell no nonsense. Unfortunately, in India, sometimes we don't study enough the historical background of the things. Or one unit or one department will study, but it's not shared with all the different departments, Army, Intelligence Agency, MEA, MHA, and all. That should also know this background, which is important to understand the issue.
I'll shift to a legal issue, Claude, about the border issue. Now, in 2021, the Chinese brought in a national border law, which calls for Chinese civilian and military agencies to safeguard Chinese civilian territories. So obviously, with their claims on Arunachal Pradesh and places and Ladakh, areas of Ladakh, do you foresee in the future that they can make a legal claim over these issues? And what can India do to offset this chicanery, I would say?
I think there is nothing to do, but it's their own internal problem. They can decide whatever they want. But basically today, when there's an issue, like there was on December 9, the local brigade commander or the GOC will deal with the PLA, will not deal with, India is not really concerned by this so-called reorganization through their border law. I think it was more for them to coordinate between the different organizations dealing, surveying, for example, the PAP, the Border Armed Police, the PLA, just to get a clearer organization for themselves. But India should not bother by their own. But what India can do and what India should do and what India does is to develop the border, develop the infrastructure. And I've been in September to Tawang side. I was to go to Yangtse, to the place where but unfortunately due to torrential rain, I couldn't make it. I went last month to Ladakh. I have seen in 3-4 years the difference of infrastructure. That is incredible, and I think India should continue in this. Now, India has done also something very positive in opening this area. I've always been writing about, let's forget about this inner line. What is the inner line permit? Inner line is something which was invented by the British at the end of the 19th century to stop the so-called tribal people to come and raid the tea gardens of the British. Or they don't want to go, the people running the tea garden to go in remote areas like that, where they could be attacked. So, but what is today, 21st century, 2022, what is the inner line permit? What is the relevance of inner line permit? If you need to check for security purpose that tourists do not go in place you don't want them to go, you can very easily ask them to report to the local SP or anything like that. Now they have, the government since a few months in Ladakh as well as in Arunachal has relaxed these rules and allow people, because it is India's territory. If Indian nationals, Indian citizens go to the border of India, it's India's right. Unfortunately, in the past, the government have been bullied by the Chinese propaganda. They start shouting, "This is our territory. Dalai Lama should not be there. You should not allow people to go." That is India's territory, and India does what it wants. And if it thinks it's fit that to bring tourism on the border, that's good. And today in Ladakh, people can go to Demchok, which was forbidden 3 years back. And similarly, in Chumi, Yangtse, where the incident took place on December 9, visitors can go. There is not a road up to the place, but they have to walk 40 minutes or something like that. But people can go, and because it's India's territory. So why should India stop its own citizen just because of the pressure? I think India should stop this bullying by China. I think in many ways it has stopped already, but should go ahead. And it is true that these people on the border are very poor. When I was in Ladakh, I went to Chushul, which is close to the LAC, where the war took place in '62. I saw these grazers, these nomads. They're really poor people. And I asked them, "What do you want?" They said, "We would like to have homestay. It will increase our revenue."
Definitely.
Similarly, you are aware that in Uttarakhand, the 700-800 ghost village, people are poor everywhere on the border because they don't get development benefit. Now, when I went about 10 years ago, I had gone already to Tawang, and I was told there, India should not make roads. I said, why? Because if China comes, they will use these roads. So such a poor argument, such a ridiculous argument, you don't make road because they said, let the Chinese come and break their trucks on our poor tracks. But this is stupid because in 1962, when they came in October, in 18 days, they did a road from Bumla to Tawang. And you can see still when you travel to Bumla, you can still see that road. So today, the government is going the other way. Is doing roads, is doing tunnels. Is in Sela, hopefully in January, February, the tunnel will be open. It will shorten 1 or 2 hours the trip from Rupa, from the headquarters of the division to Tawang. So everywhere India is pushing roads toward the border, and at the same time trying to help people by developing tourism. Local people can be guides. That's really a great progress.
So Claude, you say that you talked about the infrastructure development and how things have been changing. Now there is a school of thought which says that there was a recent joint US-India joint military exercises in Oli, not very far away from this place. Now, there is a school of thought which says that the infrastructure development, China is not liking the infrastructure development in Arunachal Pradesh. So this ingress in Yangtse was a counter reaction to that infrastructure development, or perhaps a counter reaction to the joint exercises. So what exactly is your take on the timing of this intrusion in India, these skirmishes which had? What was the actual reason behind this?
You see, again, I think that India should not bother too much about the reaction that the Chinese will have for joint exercise in Holi. It's India's business. If they want to do joint exercise, they can do with any nation. It used to happen with China, and every year they used to have, but after the COVID and after Doklam mainly, it has stopped. But so India can have its own relation with any third country and have own joint exercise, and it can be anywhere on India's territory. It's India's choice. It is no business of China to interfere in this issue. Regarding the, if it's, I don't think it's, we should not bother also that say about the reaction of China. Is it a reaction to the joint exercise, or is it the reaction to that or that? When I went to Ladakh 3 years ago, not in October, but my previous trip before COVID, and I went to Danchok, and I discovered that when you enter the Indus Valley, when the Indus take a bend in Dungti and goes toward south of Danchok, there was no road. You have to drive on a sort of a track following the Indus. I said, why no road? I was told, no, but China will react and will protest. I said, but why should we always bother for everything about the reaction of China? So now the situation has totally changed, especially after May 2020, after the massive attack in different places in Ladakh. Now India does its own road and do not ask and do not care for the China's reaction. I think it should be the policy. India has to do what it has to do, not to react. So if we are going to cancel the joint exercise with America just because India will react, or if we have to cancel a visit of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tawang just because China will react, I think that is not correct. And I think this policy has changed, and that is for good. India is in whatever is happening in India, it's India's, the government's decision, and they should just go with it. Now, I would just want to comment 1 minute on what Rashtra Mr. Rajnath Singh said in his statement in Parliament. He spoke about statu quo. It means statu quo means it didn't refer to the IB or the LAC. He said there was a statu quo since a few years in Yangtse, and why China is breaking this statu quo. Now, as I mentioned, that this place is a very sacred place. It's a holy place. It was blessed by Guru Padmasambhava in the 8th century. He meditated there. There's 108 waterfall. 108 is a very sacred number also. And that's a very special place, which is for the Tibetan as well as a Mompa, the local population. It's a place of pilgrimage. Now, India has built a small Gompa, which is a few hundred meters south of the LAC. So at that time, it was inaugurated by Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, Sri Pema Khandu, in July of 2020. Now, China has not said anything or complained about anything, has not said that this area is not part of India. So why today they came in such a large number? I think one of the reasons is it's first time. They will come to 20, 30 soldiers, but this time it's hundreds. One of the reasons they don't want India to forget that the issue of the border is not solved. Also, I don't know if it has a link, but Xi Jinping was in Saudi Arabia. So it has happened in the past in 2014 in Chumar in Ladakh, that when Mr. Xi Jinping came to India, he went to Ahmedabad, where he was received by the Prime Minister. And at the same time, the 1,500 Chinese PLA enter in Chumar in Ladakh. So it has happened several times that when Xi Jinping is abroad, it would mean that maybe he has not entire control. but it's just speculation. But it should be kept in mind. It should not just be brushed away. Also, you have to remember that Tibet has been, the Tibetan Autonomous Region in particular, has been under a severe COVID wave from August till December, early December. Everything was under lockdown. The entire region was under lockdown. I mean, we have seen horrible pictures in Lhasa. In the stadium, there were small boxes in which the people who were COVID positive were kept. The train, for example, from Lhasa to Ningxi reopened about 4 weeks ago maximum. 3 weeks ago it reopened. So it had certainly an effect on the PLA, which doesn't come usually into the media or in the blog or in the social media. But I was told they were also badly affected by the thing. After demonstration erupted in China, all over China, Xi Jinping seems to have changed his policy very discreetly, but now it's absolutely clear that the policy has been changed and to stop this lockdown business, which affects the economy and affects also the social the security and the social stability of the country. So it has totally changed, but there is no way that the PLA would have not been affected by that. So now maybe it was also an occasion, because in 1 month's time it will be too late, it will be winter, and though this place is not too high, it's about 11,000 feet, but still during the winter it's very difficult to do anything. So China used that window to come in, and as Rashtramatri mentioned, it is they try to change the status quo. Now, what does India reaction shows? The Jats, the CKLI, and JNK rifle who stopped them show that they were able, though in the first hour or so, they were overpowered by China, they were able to bring reinforcement very quickly and repel and send them back. Out of 3-4 hours, they were sent back to their side. Interesting issue. We will maybe come to the Xiaokang village later, but my question is, and I have no answer, were the Xiaokang village used as a garrison for the PLA, who came in a large number? Because usually there's not that much number of troops which are living very close to that remote border. It is true that China has done a new road there. They have done new roads everywhere. And this Xiaokang village probably should be watched, because if they are fully used for the PLA, that's a serious issue for India. So all this, the COVID, the visit of Xi Jinping, and winter coming, I think decided China to do this operation, which was not successful. But at the same time, that operation, the orders for this have been taken at the highest level. It's not possible that the Tibetan military district, the commander of the Tibetan military district, would have taken that decision on its own without referring to the Western Theater Command in Chengdu and referring to the CMC, the Central Military Commission in Beijing. Because China usually, they don't have, the local commander do not have the freedom to move like in India very fast and take decision when something is happening. And that is a very big weakness of the PLA. They have to refer everything to Chengdu or Beijing. So there's no doubt that this operation with several hundred troops involved was taken at the highest level.
So this psychology of the PLA acting when Xi Jinping is visiting abroad, it needs to be studied a bit more, I believe. Talking of these Xiaokang villages, India has on its own decided to build around vibrant, we are talking of vibrant villages in Arunachal Pradesh and the border areas. Now, how vibrant and how viable are these villages to secure the borders? And secondly, although you have answered the question partly before also, can tourism be developed as a tool to counter this Chinese aggression in the border areas and bring more Indianness in these areas?
Certainly that it can be used, but once again, China is very much in advance on India, in the sense that they have a 650 or so Xiaokang village. So the first village in Kibutu sector of Arunachal, I think there's 3 villages, but it's a good thing. It's a first step, and whether you call it vibrant village or not, the issue of ghost villages in Uttarakhand or in Arunachal or even in Ladakh is very, very, very serious issue, because you need a populated border and you need the border people to be on your side. Actually, that could be India very great advantage on China. To have the border population on its side, because I doubt sometimes that the Tibetan population on north of the McMahon Line or in Western Tibet or in Xinjiang is with the Chinese PLA or the Chinese government, because they know that people are free in India. They can they are not monitored every movement that they are doing, and it's really some great advantage that India has compared to. But at the same time, you have to give them a decent life. Like I was mentioning last month, this herder, this grazer that I met in Chushul, they have a tough life. In many of the villages in Uttarakhand or even in the border area in Arunachal, I went to Menchuka a few years ago. It's very tough life, and in government has to do something for them. I think government has started doing. It should continue. I think in the case of Arunachal, the state is very lucky to have Mr. Pema Khandu, who has a military background. His father was an officer in the Indian Army, in the intelligence wing, and he served in the army. I'm speaking of Dorje Khandu. Now the son is chief minister. He understands this issue. He understands the strategic issue. He always said, we have no border with China. My state has no border with China. It has a border with Tibet only. So the fact that Pema Khandu, the chief minister, really understands could help to bring also more well-being for the local population, which is crucial in case of a conflict. I'm not speaking of a one-day conflict or clash like it happened on December 9, but something more serious like in the 62. I don't think it will happen because China cannot afford it, but if in case it happens, the local population, if they are fully with India, and whenever I visited this remote place, this border area, I feel people are, I would say, more patriotic than sometimes people in South or in Central India or in Delhi, because I was watching them watching cricket or like that. They were totally mad about it. So that's a very great advantage that India has, because I'm not sure at all that China can say the same thing with the Tibetan population. It would be enough of one word from Dharamsala for them to change. That's why this scheme of enrolling the Tibetan in the army, you see what happened in August 2020 in Ladakh, in the Kailash range, when the Tibetan Special Force took the entire ridge, that all these Gurung Hills and Magar Hills and that China got very shocked. because for them, they have liberated Tibet in 1950-51. And they said the Tibetans are Chinese. Why should they side with the Indians? And they saw that it's a Tibetan who did that special operation, who brought a tremendous strategic advantage to India. So they start saying, now we will also recruit Tibetans. But I don't think it's working, because now they don't speak about it anymore. And they know that ultimately they can't trust the Tibetans, because their leader is in India. Their leader has called himself a son of India. So that's a tremendous advantage. So, and in general, the local population, they will not support. So that's one of the reasons of the Xiaokang village, because this Xiaokang village, many times it's relocated people. Relocated means from northern Tibet, from Nachu prefecture, for example, or from Han people, from the mainland. Now I mentioned that village in Longju, which was the first clash in '59. That village has been built out of nothing. There was no house, nowhere in where they built that village. So it means that you can only bring people there. When you speak about vibrant village, you want to give a more decent life to the existing village, and you don't want people to go to school 50, 100 kilometers away. In Chushul, they said that we have to send our kids to Leh after the class 9, for example. We would like that to class 12, that there is some possibility that they are taught in Chushul itself, so that they don't go away, because once they go, they don't come back. That's this Xiaokang village on the Chinese side of the border are populated with people from outside. So it's not these people that they say the guardian of the border. They are not the guardian of the border. Guardian of the border is the PLA. It's like you cannot say that Arunachali are the guardian of the border, but to have the local population on your side is a great advantage.
I would like to conclude this conversation on this note, Claude. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing all that you have with us. Thank you so much, and would like to come back to you very soon. Thank you and namaskar.
Namaskar.